सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ॐ पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ॐ आप्यायन्तु ममाङ्गानि वाक्प्राणश्चक्षुश्रोत्रमथो बलमिन्द्रियाणि च सर्वाणि सर्वं ब्रह्म उपनिषदं माहं ब्रह्म निराकुर्याम् मा ब्रह्म निराकरोत्। अनिराकरणमस्त्वनिराकरणं मे अस्तु तदात्मनि निरते यौपनिषत्सु धर्मास्ते मयि सन्तु ते मयि सन्तु। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः। ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। ओमित्येतदक्षरमुद्गीतमुपासीत ओमिति ह्युद्गायते तस्योपव्याख्यानम् न वेदश्रुतेः अस्तितो गौण्यसम्भवाद् शब्दाच्च स्याच्च एकस्य ब्रह्मशब्दवत् प्रतिज्ञा अहानिः अव्यतिरेकाद् शब्देभ्यः। प्रतिज्ञा अहानिः तस्याः प्रतिज्ञायाः एवं अहानिः अनुप्रोधः स्यात्। That pratigna or the proposition of the knowledge of everything by the knowledge of one would only remain unaffected provided यदि अव्यतिरेकः स्यात्। यदि अव्यतिरेकः कृष्णस्य वस्तुजातस्य विज्ञेयात् ब्रह्मणः स्यात्। Only कृष्णस्य वस्तुजातस्य whatever there is in this universe avyaktiriktam was non-separate from Brahman, which is to be known, then alone that pratigna. Why? What is Vijnayam? Because yena vijnanena sarvijnatam bhavati, the knowledge by which everything becomes known. Therefore, what is to be known is Brahman. So vijnayat brahmanaha avyatireka syat. Only when whatever exists is non-separate from Brahman, then alone this pratigna or proposition can be sustained. Vyatireke sati eka vijnanena saram vijnayate idyam pratigna hiyeta. On the other hand, if anything stands apart from Brahman, then this pratigna proposition that everything is known by knowing Brahman would be affected, would be stifled, would be proven wrong. सच व्यतिरेकः एवं उपपद्यते यदि कृष्ण वस्तु जातम् एकस्मात् ब्रह्मण उत्पद्येत. How is it possible that whatever is non-separate from Brahman? Only when whatever is the product of Brahman. If Brahman is the material cause of whatever there is, then alone the non-separateness is possible, because the effect is always non-separate from the material cause. The discussion in this sutra that's going on right now is Ved Utpatti Vishaya Shrutintarasya Darshitvatvat. We have shown that Vyat or the Akasha is indeed born because the Taittiriya Shruti clearly says Tasmadva etasmad atmana akasha sambhutah. So Purva Pakshi says true, that's all right. But that creates another problem. Bhavatu ekavakyatvam aviruddhanam. Therefore, the Siddhanti said that all the Shrutis have the same purport, that there is unity of purports. The Purva Pakshi says that unity of purport can be accepted provided the statements of Shruti do not contradict each other. Yetu virodha uktah. But here we have clearly pointed out how there is a contradiction between the statements of the Shruti. Sakruta shrutasya srashtuhu sastavyada sambandha asambhavat. That one srashta, one creator, cannot be simultaneously associated with the two things to be created. He could not have created space as well as fire first. Dvayoscha prathamajatva sambhavat. Again, two things, namely fire and space cannot be number one, cannot be created first. One of them alone can be created first. Vikalpa asambhavacha. Or if you say that, well, according to Taittiriya Upanishad, Akasha is created first. According to Chhandogya, fire is created first. Why not? Vikalpa asambhavat. This alternative is not possible. So we have shown how these two Shrutis, the Chhandogya Shruti and the Taittiriya Shruti, contradict each other. Therefore, Upanishad is not Pramanam. Naisha dosha. That is not the dosha. What you say, that dosha or defect is not there. Tejas sargasya Taittiriyake trutiyatva shravanat. Very clearly it is said in Taittiriya Upanishad, Vayoho agnihi. The Agni is third in sequence in creation. Ashakyahi yam shrutihi anyatha parinetum. And it is not possible that you can interpret the Shruti in any different way, because Shruti is very clear. Shakyatu parinetum Chhandogya Shrutihi. Whereas Chhandogya just says Tat Teja Asujata, that Brahman created fire. So it is possible to understand that Shruti to mean Brahman created fire after creating space and air. Nai iyam Shruti tejojani pradhana sati Shrutyantar prasiddham akashasya utpattim varayatum shaknoti. All that Chhandogya Upanishad says is that Brahman created fire. That's all it says. Meaning that the purport of the statement is to present that fire is created. That's all it means. And that statement cannot be interpreted to mean that space is not created. He says fire is created. And you may say space is not created, but then Shrutyantara Prasiddham, something that is very well told in the other Shruti Taittiriya, where Akasha is created. So what is established? That creation of Akasha cannot be denied by this Shruti, which simply says Brahman created fire. Ekasya vakyasya vyaparadvaya asambhavad. One vakya tat teja asrujata cannot accomplish two meanings, that Brahman created fire and secondly Brahman did not create space. These two separate meanings cannot be brought out by the same sentence. If one sentence cannot convey two meanings, we say that one Srashta cannot create two things also. Why not? Srashta tu ekopi kramena anekam srashtavyam srujet. Whereas a maker or a creator can create many things one after the other. It is true that a one creator or maker cannot make two things simultaneously. If you are making chapati, that's at a time, that's what you can make. You cannot make chapati and the bhakri and stuff like that, but one by one you can do. Iti ekavakyatva kalpanayam sambhavantyam na viruddharthatvena shruti hatavya. Thus, it is possible to understand these two statements of Shruti to arrive at the unity of their purport. When that explanation is plausible or possible, then to argue and arrive at this conclusion that they contradict each other is not right. Na viruddharthatvena hatavya, to interpret them as conveying contradictory meaning, and that way to abandon them is not proper. Na chasmabhi sakarshrutasya srashtuhu srashtavyadva sambandha abhiprayate. And further, we are not even saying that the Srashta or the Creator creates two things simultaneously. Shutyantara Sustavyantar Upasangrahat. When we say that, Sustavyantar Upasangrahat. So, Srastavya, for example, Chhandogya says Brahman created fire and water and earth. So we say that Srastavyantara, other two things, space and air, also should be included. That's all we are saying. By that we do not mean that the Srashta or the Creator creates them simultaneously. What we mean is that tat akasham asrujata, tad vayam asrujata, tat teja asrujata. For each one of them, we are in fact imagining separate sentences. Therefore, it is not that one sentence conveys more than one meanings. So how what is said in one place does not contradict what is said in a different place. Yathacha sarvam khalvidam brahma tajjalan yatra sakshadeva sarvasya vastujatasya brahmajatvam shruyamanam. For example, this is said in the third chapter, sarvam khalu idam brahma, all of this indeed Brahma, tajjalan. That Brahman is the source of everything, sustainer of everything, the layasthanam, the place where everything gets resolved. Idyatra sakshadeva sarvasya vastujatasya brahmajatvam shruyamanam. This statement very clearly says that sarvam khaluidam brahma, sarvam, whatever it is created from Brahman. It says directly. न प्रदेशांतरभेदम तेजः प्रमुखम उत्पत्ति क्रमम वारयति. That everything is created from Brahman. Elsewhere it says that fire is created first or second. This does not contradict. So this also is okay and that also is okay. They are not contradictory. This statement does not contradict what is clearly stated elsewhere. Evam tejasopi brahmajatvam shruyamanam na shrutyantaravihitam nava pramukam utpatti kramam bharatum arhati. Similarly also, Chhandogya simply says that Brahman created fire. That cannot in any way overrule what is said in the Taittiriya, that space is created first, fire is created third. Nanu savidhanartham etadvakyam. This Shruti tad jalanati shanta upasita. So the Purva Pakshi says that samvidhanartham etadvakyam. This Vakya that you are quoting as an illustration actually is not meant to prescribe the creation, is meant to prescribe the quietude or tranquility of the mind. Tad jalaniti shanta upasita. So Bhashyakara quoted the statement Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma Tad Jalan. He says proceed further. Tad Jalaniti Shanta Upasita. Complete that sentence. So Shanta Upasita. Upasita is a vidhanam, is a vidhi. That one should meditate. Shantasan Upasita. One should meditate. Having become tranquil, one should meditate. Therefore, this statement in fact only prescribes a tranquility of the mind, doesn't mean that it is a statement which is prescribing creation or teaching creation. Netat srushtivakyam. Therefore, the primary purpose of the statement that you have quoted is not to convey the idea of creation, it is to convey the idea of tranquility of mind. Tasmat etat na pradeshandar prasiddham kramam uparodhum arhateti. Therefore, this statement cannot overrule the primacy of fire, that fire is created first, it cannot overrule the sentence. Tat teja asujata iti etat sushtivakyam. So if both the vakyas have the same purport, then you can use one or you can interpret or you can contradict. If tajjaladi shanda upasita was sushtivakyam, then you can see whether it corresponds to the sushtivakya of Chhandogya. Tat teja asvajata. But that is not sushtivakyam. That's a vakya that prescribes only tranquility of mind. Therefore, you cannot use that as an illustration to interpret what the Chhandogya says. Tasmadatra yatha shruti kramaha grahitavya iti. Therefore, here yatha shruti kramaha, Chhandogya says tat teja asrujata, tad apaha asrujata, tad annam asrujata. Therefore, we say that the fire is created first, water second, and the earth third. So then Siddhanti said on the page 506, na iti uchyate. To that, our answer is that your contention is not right. Nahi teja prathamyanurodhena shrutyandar prasiddha vyat padartha parityaktavyo bhavati. Just because you want to interpret the Chhandogya Upanishad, Chhandogya Shruti, Tat Teja Asrujata, you would interpret that Brahman created fire first, that's what you are interpreting. But by that interpretation, you are discarding altogether the creation of space and fire, which is very clearly stated in the Taittiriya Shruti. Nahi teja prathamya anurodhena shrutyantara prasiddha vyat padartha paritaktavyo bhavati. You are discarding altogether the entity called space by insisting that the fire is that, by insisting upon interpretation that that statement means fire is created first. Padartha dharmatvat kramasya. Because it is nature of things that they are created in sequence. It's the nature of things. They are not created simultaneously, created in sequence. Abhija tat teja asrujata itin natra kramasya vachaka kachit shabda asti. And all that the Chandogya says is tat teja asrujata. It created fire. it does not say it created fire first. And therefore, kramasya vachaka na kaschit shabda asti. There is no word there which indicates krama or the order of creation. Arthatu krama avagamyate. You may say arthat only by arthapatti. By arthapatti, you arrive at this conclusion that Chhandogya means that fire was created first. It is not Shruti, meaning that Shruti does not say that fire was created first. By arthapatti, by presumption, you are arriving at that conclusion. Sacha vayo agnihiti anena shrutyantara prasiddhena kramena nivaryate. By that conclusion of yours, that you want to interpret that statement to mean that fire is created first, is definitely ruled out by a clear statement of Taittiriya that Vayu Agnihi, the Agni was created from Vayu, was third in order. So that statement, that's a Shruti statement. And yours is Arthapatti interpretation. Therefore, Shruti is much stronger than Arthapatti. Therefore, this Arthapatti can be ruled out in favor of Shruti. Now we continue on the page 506. In the third line, Ratnaprabha says, Yaduktam vastuni vikalpa sambhavat uhayoh prathavyam shakhabedena vyavasthitam na bhavati. At one point in time, the Purvapakshi said, Vastuni vikalpa asambhavat. In Vastu, there cannot be an alternative nature. Vastu or any entity has one nature. It cannot have alternative nature. That as far as gravity is concerned, in India, things will fall from up to down. In United States, they'll go up. A law of gravity cannot have these two kinds of nature. Other water in India will boil at 100 degrees centigrade, in US 150 degrees centigrade at the same atmospheric pressure. Cannot be. Therefore, vikalpa sambhavat. There cannot be vikalpa or alternate explanation or interpretation of the nature of things. Uvayoho prathamyam shakhavedana vyavasthitam na bhavati. Therefore, these two Shrutis cannot be right. One of them alone can be right. Either space is created first or fire is created first. And then that Ekadeshi said that the Chhandogya Shruti is primary and Taittiriya Shruti is Gauni. So the conclusion was that fire is created first. So you cannot say that space also is created first and fire created, because that vikalpa or alternative is not possible. Napi uvayoho dvidala ankuravat samuchitta utpatya prathamyam. Nor can you say that just as from the seed which has two equal halves, similar halves, that the two sprouts emerge simultaneously, that similarly air and fire also were born simultaneously. That also is not possible. Why? Vayoho agnihiti karmabadhat. Because elsewhere it is clearly said that the fire is created from vayu or air, and that will be contradicted if we say that fire is created first. So this is what Purvapakshi says, tadishtam eva. So you are right, that is acceptable to us. This part of Purvapaksha is ishtam, desirable to us. Vikalpayati. So Bhashyakara says the fourth line, Vikalpa samuchayauto viyattejasoho prathamajatva vishaya asambhava anabhyapagamabhyam nivaritau. Vikalpa samuchaya. Vikalpa alternates alternately, and samuchaya is jointly, alternately or jointly. Vyat tejasoho prathamajattva vishaya asambhava. That Vyat and Tejas, space and fire, Vikalpa, that they are alternately created first. You know, that according to Taittiriya, space is first. Like Chhandogya, fire is first. So both alternatives are okay. Asambhava, that is impossible. And secondly, that why not they be created simultaneously? Anabhivagamat, we cannot accept that both of them are created simultaneously because elsewhere it is said, Vayo Agni. So we do not accept the prathamyam of the two things simultaneously. Nivarito. Therefore, those two arguments have already been refuted on the ground of asambhava anabhivagama. Asambhava, impossibility of vikalpa. That alternately, that both of them, can be first. Here this can be first, there that can be first. That vikalpa or alternative has been refuted. Or both of them are born simultaneously, that also is not accepted by us because we say that Vayahu Agnihi, so Agni is created third. Taittiriya Shruti Anurodhena Chhandogya Shruti Nayanat Natayoho Virodha Asti. So this Ekadeshi want to interpret Taittiriya Shruti on the basis of Chhandogya Shruti. We say that Chhandogya Shruti should be interpreted in keeping with the Taittiriya Shruti. Then there is no virodha or contradiction between those two. So Tasmat, Bhashyakara says, Tasmat Nasti Shrutyoho Vipratishedaha. So thus, if you interpret the Chhandogya Shruti in keeping with the Taittiriya Shruti, then there is no contradiction between the two. So you have chosen to interpret Taittiriya Shruti according to Chhandogya, and that is how the virodha comes. But if you interpret the Chhandogya in keeping with Taittiriya, there is no virodha. Therefore, that should be the line of argument. The point is that where argument should be to establish the pramanyam, the authenticity of the Upanishad, and not question it, not the other way around. So when this interpretation is plausible and proper, you should not go for another interpretation which brings about contradiction between the Shrutis. Then say Ratnaprabha, na kevalam Shruti Devyoho avirodha sauhardam cha asti. Shruti Devyoho, what is that? Between Shruti Devi, So Shruti said Devi. Na kevalam Shruti Devyoho virodha avirodha. Not only that, these two statements of Shruti, they do not contradict each other. Sauhardam cha asti, anukulyam cha asti. In fact, both of them are favorable to each other. Not only that they are not opposed to each other, not only that not enemies of each other, they are friends of each other, Not only that these two Shrutis do not contradict each other, they support each other. Apicha. So that's said next sentence. Apicha Chhandogye Yena Ashrutam Shrutam Bhavati Ityetam Pratignyam Vakyopakrame Shrutam Samathayitum Asamamnatamapi Vyata Utpattau Upasankhyaatavyam Kimanga Punaha तैत्तिरीयके समाम्नातं नभः न संगृह्यते. So, अपि च छान्दोग्ये येन अश्रुतं श्रुतं भवति इति एतां प्रतिज्ञां वाक्योपक्रमे श्रुताम्. Vakyopokrame, right in the beginning of the Upanishad. Right in the beginning, in the introduction itself, this pratigna or proposition is stated by Shruti, yena shrutam shrutam bhavati. Then, by knowing which, what is not heard of becomes heard. Tam samathayitum, in order to support that, sustain that. Asamamnatamapi vyat utpattau upasankhyaatavyam. In fact, even though Chhandogya Shruti does not clearly talk about the creation of space and air, in fact, they should be included. Then only this pratigna can be sustained. What's the pratigna? By knowing one, everything becomes known. Now, if Brahman did not create space and Brahman did not create air, which means that they are different from Brahman, then by knowing Brahman, they cannot be known. In which case, this pratigna, Chhandogya, contradicts its own pratigna. If you do not include upasankhyaatavyam or upasamhartavyam, either way, should be included. If you, in Chhandogya, if you do not include space and air, then the pratigna of Chhandogya itself is contradicted. Therefore, asamamnatam, even though not clearly stated, space and air, they should be included in order for justification of that pratigna. Kimanga punah taittiriye samamnatam nava na sangruhyate. Then what to say? That taittiriye samamnatam. If nowhere the creation of space is stated, then perhaps we may wonder whether space is created or not. If nowhere in the Upanishad the creation of space was stated, then we would still have to accept that space is created, but that would be arthapatti. Because this pratigna cannot be sustained unless everything is non-separate from Brahma. Pratigna ahani avyatarekat. But that would be by arthapatti. But here there is a clear statement, etasmat atmanah akasha sambhutah. And so, kimanga punah taitiriyake samamnatam nabha. Nabha or vyat or the space which is uttered or stated by the Shruti, that it should not be included, even if no Shruti said. Then also we should have to include the space in order for that pratigna to be justified. Then where is the question of not including space when it is clearly stated the space is created, stated in Taittiriya Upanishad. So say Ratnaprabha, Vyat upasangrahavyam sangrahyam iti anvayah. So upasankhyaatavyam or upasangrahyam, it should be included. Then Ratnaprabha continues, Vyad anutpattivadina uktam anudya pratignayaha advitiya shrutescha mukhyartha tatparya avagamat na gaunarthada iti dushayate. Vyad anutpattivadina, that Ekadeshi who said Vyad ashrutehe, that space is not created because Shruti does not say anything about creation of space. Uktam anudya. So whatever he has said in support of that contention is reiterated here. Pratignayaha advitiya shrutescha mukhyartha tatparya avagamat. So that Vyat anutpattivadi, the person who was promoting the non-creation of space, said that these two statements, that everything is known by knowing one, is to be taken also in secondary sense. Ekameva Advityam, one without a second also, should be taken in secondary sense, not in a primary sense. It is one without a second, all right, only with reference to its own products. Meaning that the clay is one without a second with reference to the pots and pans that are created from clay. You cannot say that clay is non-dual with reference to the potter's wheel and the rod, etc. Cannot be. Therefore, that knowledge of one, knowledge of everything by knowledge of one should be taken in a secondary sense. And Advitiyatvam also should be interpreted with reference to its own product. That clay is non-dual with reference to, but then, so Advitiyatva also, and that everything is known by knowing clay, only products of clay are known, not other things. Meaning that both the statements, knowledge of everything by knowledge of one, as well as the non-duality, ekam eva advitiyam, both of them should be taken in the gauna secondary sense. So says now, Pratignayaha advitya sudescha mukhyartha tatpari avagamat. Says no, both of the statements are to be taken in primary sense. Therefore, no gaunarthata, those should not be taken in a gauna or in the secondary sense. In a figurative sense, dushayati yachuktam ityadya. So first of all, Vashyakara does Anuvada, reiterates what that person had said, the Ekadeshi, and then gives a reply. Yaccha uktam akashasya sarvena ananyadesha kalatvad brahmana tatkaryaischa sah viditam eva तद्भवति अतः न प्रतिज्ञा हीयते न च एकमेवाद्वितीयम् इति श्रुतिकोपो भवति क्षीरोदकवत् ब्रह्मनभसोः अव्यतिरेकोपपत्तेः इति Iti yaccha uktam, what you have said, yaccha uktam. What is it? Akashasya. So he interpreted this pratigna, knowledge of everything by knowledge of one, and non-duality, both of them in secondary sense by giving different example. He gave the example of kshirodaka. He gave the example of the clay and the pots. That akashasya sarvena ananyadesha kalatvat, because whatever exists in space, and therefore it is not separate from space in space and time. And again, space also does not exist in different space and time from Brahman. Therefore, Brahmana tat karyesya sa viditameva. Therefore, when you know Brahman and the effects of Brahman, the space being non-separate is also known by the way. Ataha na pratigna hiyate. Therefore, pratigna of knowing everything with knowledge of one is not compromised. Nacha ekameva dvityam iti shruti-kopa bhavati. Not to say that the non-duality, one with the second also, is not contradicted. Kshirodakavat brahmanavasoho avyatireka uvattehe. Just like kshira and udaka, milk and water are avyatireka. Water is not separate from milk. Similarly also in that sense we can say that world is not separate from Brahman. So by this example it is possible to interpret these two statements, how the non-duality also in a secondary sense and not everything also is a secondary sense. Iti yatcha uktam, which is what I stated. अतः न प्रतिज्ञायति यत्र आकाशस्य उत्पत्ति अभावेपि So na pratigna hiyate akashasya utpatti abhavepi. Even though the akasha is not created, according to the argument, this pratigna is not compromised. Ekameva dveshruti samadhana anuvadati and nacha. And also the other shruti kopo na bhavati. We are not contradicting the shruti of non-duality. Anyatha pratigna upapadanam tavad dushayati. So first of all, Bhashyakara shows a dosha in interpreting that pratigna in a different way, in a gauni or a secondary sense. Bhashyakara shows what dosha or what defect is involved. Atrayati. So Bhashyakara says, Atra uchyate. To this is what we have to say. Na kshirodakanyayena idam ekavijnanena sarvavijnanam netavyam mrudadi drishtanta prananadhi prakriti vikaranyayena eva idam sarva vijnanam netavyam iti gamyate. Atra uchyate. To this we have to say that nakshirodaka jnayena idam eka vijnanena sarva vijnanam netavyam. This proposition of knowing everything by one cannot be explained by the example of kshira and udaka, explained by the example of milk and water. Mrudadi drishtanta prayanadhi. Understand that Shruti gave her own illustration. Yatha ekena mrutpindena sarvam mrunmayam vijnadam syat. So, it is not the clay that example meant. So says, Vacharambanam vikaro namadhyam mritvika ityeva satyam. So wherever vikara is there, modification is there, it is Vacharambanam, it is mithya, mritvika ityeva satyam, and mritvika clay meaning the upadana karanam is satyam. That's what is meant. Not clay is satyam, but upadana karanam is satyam. In the kshirodaka, the kshira and udaka are not related to each other, the upadana karanam, and therefore you cannot explain away the knowledge of one, all by knowledge of one, by the example of kshira and udaka nyayana, mruda didustanda prananadi, prakriti vikara nyayana eva, idam sarvignatam netavyam. Prakriti vikara nyayana, by the nyaya, the rule of prakriti and vikara. Prakriti, material cause, vikara, the effect. Only the effect is never separate from material cause. It is by that you have to explain, you have to understand that pratigna. Sarvavijnanam netavyam. Eka vijnanena sarvavijnanam. Netavyam should be explained that way. Says Ratnaprabha, prakriti vikara nyaya tat ananyatva nyaya. So prakriti vikara nyayena, by the rule of prakriti and vikara, so ananyatva, non-separatedness has to be explained by the example of the effect and material cause and not by the example of the milk and water. If you see Bhamati in the third line, Drishtanta anurupatvad darshtantikasya. Because darshtantika, what is illustrated, should be anurupa, should be in keeping with drishtanta, illustration. Illustrated must be in keeping with the illustration. Tasyacha prakriti vikarupatvad darshtantikasyapi tatha bhavaha. And therefore, drishtanta is what? Prakriti vikara rupatvat. Drishtanta is yatha ekena mritpindena sarvam mrunmem vijñātam syāt. How everything made of clay is as well known by knowing one particle of clay. So that drishtanta is the prakriti and vikriti, the material cause and effect. So in Dashtanta also same thing should apply. So Drishtanta explains the non-separatedness by the example of the material cause and effect. Therefore, Dashtanta, what is illustrated also, should explain the non-separatedness by the Prakriti Vikara Nyaya, or the Nyaya rule of the effect and the material cause. So Bhashyakara says, Kshirodakanyayena cha sarvavijnanam kalpyamanam na samyak vijnanam syad. Kshirodakanyayena, that for the rule of the milk and water, by that sarvavijnanam kalpyamanam, to imagine that by knowing milk you already known water because water is contained in milk, na samyak vijnanam, but that would not be right vijnanam, that would not be right knowledge of water. When you know the milk, water is not known, because water is a separate entity, milk is a separate entity. They do not enjoy the relationship of material cause and effect. They are together, that's all right. So when you take up the milk, the water is taken up, that's okay. But when you know the milk, water is not known. And therefore, to claim that water is as well known by knowing milk, that would not be samyak jnanam, that would not be perfect knowledge, would not be the right knowledge. So kalpyamanam na samyak vijnanam syat, that would not be the samyak, proper knowledge, perfect knowledge, would not be. Says Bhamati apicha bhranti mulam cha etad vachanam ekameva tvitiyamiti toye kshira buddhivata. So bhranti mulam, to say that there is one without a second, but the milk and water are not one, then why you to imagine that toye kshira. So even though there is water, you have to imagine that to be milk, toye kshira buddhivata. In water, you have to do kshira buddhi. You have to know water as milk. That is bhranti jnanam. So, aupacharikam va simho manaka itivat. Or aupacharikam simho manavakah. This boy is like a lion. He is a lion. Tatra na tavat bhrantam. Okay, so, the kshirokadhyayena sarva vijnanam kalpyamanam na samyak vijnanam. So it will be bhranti mulakam, na to samyak vijnanam. Nyaya Nirnaya also explains the same thing. Kshira purne ghate prakshipta nirabindavah tad grahanenaiva gruhyante na pruthak patho bindunam grahanam avashishyate. Puru Pakshi said, Kshira purne ghate prakshipta nirabindavah, some drops of water which is put in the pot which contains milk, which is filled with milk. Nirabindavah tad grahanenaiva gruhyante. So when you empty the milk from the pot, the water also gets emptied. And therefore, na patho bindunam grahanam avashishyate. Therefore, you don't have to separately take the drops of water, because when you empty the milk pot, the water also gets emptied. You don't have to make a separate effort to empty the water. तथा ब्रह्मणि सकार्ये ज्ञाते तदभिन्न देश कालम नभो विज्ञातमेव. So Purvapakshi said, therefore, by knowing Brahman, since space also is in the same time and space, the space also is as well known. Tat anena drishtantena naida pratigyanam netum yuktam. By that drishtanta, this pratigya cannot be explained. Drishtanta anurodhitvat darshtantikasya. Because darshtantika must be always in keeping with drishtanta. Drishtantasya cha prakriti vikarupatvat darshantikepi tathatvasya yuktatvat. Since drishtanta of the mrit and in the vikara is prakriti and vikara, therefore darshtanta also should have the same rule. Tasmat akashadehe brahma vikaratve tat prakritibhuta brahmana ananyatvamiti aneneva nyayena idam netaneyam. Therefore, akashade, akasha, vayu, and whatever there is, brahma vikaratve, only when they are vikara or modification of Brahman, tat prakritibhuta brahmana ananyatvam, then alone they are all non-separate from Brahman, which is their material cause. Iti aneneva nyayena. It's only by that rule that the non-duality or eka vijnana pratigya has to be understood or explained. Itasya na kshiroka drishtantena etan netavyam. For this further reason also, this pratigya cannot be explained by the drishtanta of kshiranodaka. Next sentence is that we already read. Kshirodaka nyayena cha sarvijnanam kalpyamanam na samyak vijnanam syat. If you say that the water is known by knowing milk, that would not be the perfect knowledge. Tatra hetumaha, why is it so? Nahi iti, the Bhashyakara says, Nahi kshirajnana grahitasya udakasya samyak vijnana grahitatvam asti. Nahi kshirajnana grahitasya udakasya. So water which is supposedly known by knowing the milk, samyak vijnana grahitatvam asti. It's all right that you empty milk, the water gets emptied. But when you know milk, water doesn't get known. So by knowing the milk as milk, water does not get known as water. So udakasya samyak vijnana grahitatvam nasti. So therefore you have not known the water correctly. So Sri Ratnaprabha, udakam kshirasthamapi kshirajnanat na grhyate bhedat. Because milk is different and water is different, so even though water is in milk, because water is different from milk, therefore by knowing milk, water cannot be known because they are two different entities. So the Purvapakshi makes an argument, says Ratnaprabha, ma astu samyak jnanam shrutehe bhranti mulatva sambhavad. This is a final assault, that your Shruti is Bhranti Mula. The Shruti statements are not perfect statements. They also can make mistakes. Shruti also can, after all, be deluded. Why not? So why not this statement that everything is known by knowing one is a Bhranti, is a delusion and not to be taken literally. Just because it is Shruti, so what? Iti ashankya apaurushayat ma evam. Says no, Shruti is apaurushaya. And therefore, there cannot be bhranti or delusion or falsehood in Shruti. So, Bhashyakara says, Nacha vedasya purushanam iva Maya alika vanchanaadivihi arthavadharanam upapadyate. Purushanam, your people come to their conclusion in many ways. Human beings ascertain or come to conclusions not always by the right way because there is maya, bhranti. Very often a person is dominated by or controlled by delusion. Something wrong has already entered into the mind, and therefore you tend to interpret things wrongly. So that bhranti is possible for a human being where a wrong thing is taken to be right. And then you interpret everything accordingly. It's possible. So maya is bhranti, taya alikam, and then mithya bhashanam. Then whatever you say is mithya bhashanam, is not right. Tena vanchanam, and then you will be cheating somebody else, deceiving somebody else. You don't know. But what you think is right is in fact bhranti. Therefore what you say also is mithya bhashanam, is wrong statement. And that way somebody who trusts you will be deceived. All of this deception, etc., is possible as far as the human mind is concerned, because human mind has these limitations. There can be ignorance, there can be doubt, there can be wrong knowledge, and then says adipadat vipralipsa pramada karan apatavani gruhyante. The 6 doshas are said in the human mind. Maya, alika, vanchanam, vipralipsa, pramada, karan apatavam. Vipralipsa is deceit, deceiving. We can be deceived by our own self, Our mind can deceive us. We may deceive somebody is a different thing, but our mind can deceive us by making us believe that something is right when in fact it is wrong. Pramada, carelessness. You are not careful in observing, and therefore you just draw interpretations carelessly. Or apatavam, lack of this skill. Your indriyas may not have the right kind of skill or right kind of capability. You cannot see what is far away and still you say, this is what I saw. Sometimes the hearing also is impaired and still you may say, I heard this. So this impairment of the means of knowledge is there in human being. Sometimes carelessness also is there. Sometimes mind deceives itself. That means there is bhranti. All of this is possible. Ignorance is possible. Doubt is possible. Wrong knowledge is possible. There is bhranti is possible. All of these possibilities are there in the human mind. But understand that Shruti is not a product of human mind. Nacha vedasya purushanamiva. When Shruti comes to conclusion, or Shruti makes a statement, assert in man, it cannot be through this means. When a human being makes a statement, then it can be through this maya, can be through bhranti, and mithya bhashanam, and therefore vanchanam, or deception. All of this is possible. So human being can arrive at wrong conclusions, and they do, very often. Then maybe 10, 15, they have to change that conclusion. So the big debate a few years ago, where some committee of the United Nations said that by the year 2035, the Himalaya will be completely melted. There was a big uproar in India. And at that time, the Minister of Environment, this Jairam Ramesh, made a big deal about it. And said how this statement is not based on sound reasoning, is based on somebody's offhand statement, etc. And so those people have to withdraw that. It is not a wrong statement, but it is not proven to be right. And so somebody said to somebody else on the telephone, and based on that, those people made interpretations. Carelessness. They were not thorough, actually, in all investigations for arriving at this conclusion. So pramada can be there, bhranti can be there, all of this can be there, even when a big committee or experts also arrive at that conclusion. So many conclusions are wrong. Otherwise, the bridges would not fall down, because the structural engineers, with whatever understanding they have, arrived at the conclusion that this is what you require for making this bridge, and it fell down, and the houses break down. Even houses under construction, recently it happened. It all came down. Which means what? The calculations were wrong. Which means the decision that arrived at was wrong, was based on bhranti, wrong information, carelessness, lack of thoroughness, and so forth. That is why structural engineers always provide you 5 times what is required. They take a lot of safety factors. Still this happens, sometimes. And so says Ratnavara, pratignya mukhyatvam avidhaya advitiya shruti mukhyatam aha. So pratignya mukhyatvam, when Shruti says that everything is known by knowing one, it means what it says, and not in a figurative sense. And it also explained how all the modifications of clay are known when the clay is known. Similarly, everything is known when Brahman is known. Thereby meaning that Brahman is the upadana karanam, material cause of everything. Therefore, that Shruti must be interpreted in a primary sense. Then pratignya mukhyatvam avidhaya. Mukhyatvam, thus, that pratignya statement must be taken in primary sense, having stated that advitiya shruti mukhyatam. Then now Bhashyakara says advitiya, ekameva advitiyam. That also must be taken in the primary sense. That fellow must be taken in a secondary sense. So, savadharana iti. Savadharana cha iyam ekameva advitiyam iti shrutihi shirodakanyayena niyamana pīdyeta. Avadharana sahita ekam eva advitiyam. That avadharana is there. So one only without a second. Very clear. Savadharana cha iyam ekam eva advitiyam is shruti. This shruti which emphasizes the non-duality. Ekam eva advitiyam. Eva is emphasis. And so it emphasizes that it is one without a second. Kshirodakanyayana niyamana. If you interpret the Shruti by the rule of Kshiram, the stand of Kshira and Udaka, that how Kshira is non-dual in spite of Udaka being there, Pīdyeta, that will be adversely affected. That statement will not be properly understood. Would not be authentic, would not be right in the primary sense. Says Nyaya Nirnaya, yadi advitiyatvam aupacharikam tarhi katham avadharanam. If Shruti meant non-duality only in a figurative sense, then would not say one indeed without a second. That evakara, emphasis would not be there. Nahi manavake simhatva upacharena simhat anyo manavako naiti prayogaste. Nahi manavake simhatva upacharya. So, simho manavaka. Manavaka means a boy, a child, a kid. Sometimes they are so bright, so sometimes they are compared to fire, sometimes so fierce or fearless. For whatever reason, that child is called a lion. The Simha, but then doesn't mean that people say that he is not at all separate from Simha. That is Simha in a primary sense. When you say Simho Devadatta, like a lion Devadatta, you do not mean that Devadatta is a real lion, he is like a lion. So some gunas, some qualities are similar, but not that similar in total sense, So you don't say that the Manavaka Devadatta is not different from Simha. Nobody says that. It is. And therefore, this avadharana would not have been if the Shruti was not meant in the primary sense. So Savadhana means Sarvadvaita Nishedapara. Ratna Prabha said, Sarvadvaita Ekam Eva Advitiyam, meaning there is no Advitiyam Eva. Therefore, all Dvitiya, all duality is negated here by that Evakara. Then say Ratna Prabha, Ubhay Gaunatve Adbhutavat Upanyasah Mrudadi Drishtantehi Tat Sadhanam Cha Nasyadati Doshantaram Aha. Ubhay Gaunatve. If Pratigna also is Gauna and Advitiyatam also is Gaunam, secondary, then Adbhutavat Upanyasah. That Adbhuta means Apurva. So Shruti always tells you something that cannot be known through any other means of knowledge. That's called Apurvata. So one of the important attributes of a Pramana is Apurvata. Is what? It can be known only through that means of knowledge and by nothing else. And thus the eyes have Apurvata, a uniqueness. That colors and forms can only be known through eyes and not through any other means of knowledge. If forms and colors could be known through other means of knowledge, then eyes would not have uniqueness. Similarly also, whatever the Upanishad teaches can be known through other means of knowledge, then Upanishad would not have Apurvata, a uniqueness. So this is something most amazing, something most unheard of, Adbhutam, unheard of. What is it? Knowing everything by knowledge of one, that's unheard of. How can that be? If that pratigna is gauni, is in a secondary sense, mrudadi dushtantahita sadhanam, and that pratigna of knowing everything by knowing of one was again justified or was explained by the mrudadi dushtanta. How what is produced from clay is known by knowing clay, that also would not be iti doshantaram. So nacha ityadina. Bhashyakara says, nacha swakarya apekshaya idam vastu ekadesha vishayam sarvavijnanam ekameva dvitiyata avadharanam cha iti nyayam mrudadishu api tatsambhavat natat apurvavad upanyasitavyam bhavati. So Purvapakshi said that non-duality is only with reference to its own products. So just as somebody sees the clay on the previous day, and he also sees the potter's wheel and the stick and everything else, and next day he comes and finds all pots and pans and says, all of these were clay alone, but that statement is only meant for the pots and pans, not the potter's wheel, etc. So it does not include other things. No, that's not the example here. Swakarya apekshaya, so the non-duality is only with reference to its own karya or product. Then vastu ekadesha vishayam, that means only explains one aspect of the thing. Sarvijnanam ekameva dvitya avadharanam chedi nanyayam. Both of these statements will not be in the primary sense. Vrudadishavi, then not only it applies to Brahman, applies to clay also. If a thing is non-dual with reference to its products, then it is not only Brahman, in clay also is non-dual with reference to its products. So if that non-duality was to be explained by only its own products and not everything is to be included, then clay also is non-dual, everything is non-dual. And that, that is what everybody knows. That cannot be subject matter of Vedas. Vedas will tell us something which is unknown or not knowable by other means of knowledge. Natat apurvat upanyasitavyam bhavati. પેલા છે ને પેલો આવ્યો છે ત્યાં આગળ ઊભો છે એને કહો કે રાહ જો દિલીપભાઈ પેલો ત્યાં ઊભો છે સામે આમ જો છેક છેડે ઊભો છે પેલી બાજુ એ ચેકર શર્ટમાં એને કહો કે થોડા રાહ જોજે હમણાં આવીએ છીએ. Nat apurvat upanyasravyam bhavati. Therefore, there would be no apurvata at all if everything was not included in sarva. Ashrutam bhavati. Ashrutam shrutam bhavati. If it did not include everything, and ekameva dvitiyam, it did not, if it did not mean non-dual in a primary sense, then there will be no apurvata at all, there will be no uniqueness. Tat sambhavat brahmani visheshana vairthyam. In clay also non-duality is there, and gold also. In every material cause non-duality is there. Then to say that Brahman is non-dual would not be right. Katham, what is the upanyasa? What is that amazing upanyasa of presentation? So Bhashyakara says, Shvetaketo yan somya idam mahamanaha anuchanamani stabdosi uta tamadesham aprakshya yena ashrutam shrutam bhavati ityadina. So, what a wonderful manner this presentation was made. Shvetaketo yannu somya, O Somya, good looking one, yattu mahamanaha, you are very considered, haughty or proud, anuchanamani, very proud of your knowledge, stabdaha, irreverent, unbending, uta tamadesham apraksha yena ashrutam shrutam bhavati. Did you ask of that instruction by hearing which everything becomes heard? Have you asked of that? This is unheard of. This is adbhutam. This is unique. This is something that can never be thought of by human mind at all. That no means available, no means of knowledge available can ever think of this kind of a thing. Ityadina. Tvatpaksheva kathamidam pratigyanam. Then he says, all right, hey Siddhante, according to you, what does this pratigya mean? So Tasmat, Bhashyakara says, Tasmat ashesha vastu vishayam eva idam sarva vijnanam sarvasya brahma karyata apekshaya upanyastah iti drashtavyam. Tasmat, therefore, ashesha vastu vishayam eva idam sarva vijnanam. This sarva vijnanam should include sarvam without leaving anything at all. The sarvam must be in the primary sense. Ashesha vastu vishaya bhedam vishayam eva. That sarva should include everything, whatever. And that all sarvasya brahma karyata apekshaya. And that is presented as everything being the brahma karya, the effect of Brahman, which should be the material cause. In that way alone, this pratigna is possible, and that's what is meant by the Upanishad. Iti drashtavyam. Therefore, you must understand the pratigna of knowing of everything by knowledge of one is to be understood as knowing Brahman, which is the material cause of everything. Then alone that pratigna can be explained primary sense, avyatirekat shabdebhyascha iti. Swakarya apekshaya vastu ekadesha vishatva sambhavat. So it's not knowledge of one part, it is knowledge of everything. Iti. So that's how this adhikarana is completed here of utpatti of vyat. That space is created, air is created. That's not the point, is advitiyatvam and the pratigna. The pratigna of knowing everything by knowledge of one is what is meant by Shruti. Ekameva advitiyam, one word of the second also is meant in a primary sense. Om. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः। ईश्वरो गुरुरात्मेति मूर्तिभेदविभागिने व्योमवद्व्याप्तदेहाय दक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। हरिः ॐ। श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः। हरिः ॐ। Swamiji, come quickly.